So, tier lists. They're a thing, or they were. Do people still do them? Anyway, in the year 2021, I reviewed 29 different graphics cards, from modern day unicorns to glorified DVI ports and everything in between. Comparing them directly against one another is frankly unfair and pretty pointless overall. Let's begin, shall we? Alright, you know what a tier list is. S tier through to F tier, S being best and F being worst. I'm going to work my way through the Iceberg Tech graphics card reviews for the year in order, starting with... So, I started out the year with a video nobody watched on my personal card, the RTX 3060 Ti. It's not a great video, and I came back and looked at it again a second time later in the year. I love this card, especially the Founders Edition, and in another timeline this could have been the new GTX 1060, but, well, you all know what happened. My non-LHR version would cost you about £900 on eBay, and LHR versions at retail cost £700. I can't in good conscience recommend buying one, but it's still an awesome card for 1080 and 1440 gaming. D. I've recommended the R9 270X and the HD 7870 to friends and colleagues so many times for entry-level gaming, I'm sure I come off as a fanboy. At one time these cost reliably less than £30, and even at the beginning of the year they're in the £50 range. Nowadays at £70 plus, and with driver support terminated, they just don't look like a good buy anymore. C. Looking back, my scores from the R9 280 video seemed a bit low. I don't know if I had a bad sample or if I'd just chosen bad places to do my benchmarking, but there were too many results that came in below the 270X. It's in the same boat right now as the 270X, overpriced and under-supported, and with a growing list of games that won't run at all or are starting to show bugs and glitches. C. Still my most viewed video, the R9 290X is definitely the MVP of my channel. Like the other two R9 cards I reviewed at the start of the year, this one lost driver support in the summer. Unlike those cards, this one can run DX12 exclusive games without a fuss, and still performs amazingly well. 4GB is the cut-off point for many games now, and considering how much of a premium you have to pay for a 6GB or 8GB card these days, it's pretty much the sweet spot. Budget gamers should definitely be keeping an eye open for one of these. S. The 8GB RX 480 has been a star buy for a few years now, and by rights it should be in the A tier, maybe even S, but the price is the problem. Overall performance here is about on par with the R9 290X, maybe 10% higher on average but with full driver support and better compatibility. The 8GB frame buffer is nice to have, but there isn't really enough performance here to have you running at higher resolutions, certainly not enough to justify paying double the cost of a 290. B. I presented the GTX 1050 Ti as a card for lazy gamers, and that might not have been entirely fair, but I stand by it. If you have the know-how to install a graphics card with supplemental power, and have both a PSU with the right connectors and a big enough case, there are a whole bunch of cards you should be looking at instead of this one. C. If you were ever looking for evidence that I was an AMD shill, it would be when I followed 4 positive reviews of GCN cards with a f***ing Fermi display adapter. I wouldn't piss on a GT 705 if it was on fire. F. I think the 2060 Super was criminally underrated in its day, and of course now it's criminally overpriced. Although I test everything at 1080, this card is definitely one to think about if you're looking to game at 1440 or even 4K with DLSS. I like this card very much, but I can't see a scenario in which you can buy one in 2021 for close to a reasonable price, so... D. I've got to be a bit more kind towards the 1650 Super. They sell for less than an RX 480 8GB and perform noticeably better. The 1650 Super runs on less power but has a smaller frame buffer, so you'd have to pick one based on what's most important to you, but I think it deserves to be in the same tier. B. Big shocker here, but I have to put the GTX 1060 6GB in the same tier as the 1650 Super and the RX 480 8GB, as it performs and costs about the same. I'm pleasantly surprised to say this, as my preconceived idea before making the video was that the 1060s were boring and unimpressive, but either my standards have dropped or the 1060 is aged really well. B. Yeah, I can't separate the 6700 XT from the 3060 Ti here. It performs better, mostly, at least until you look at ray tracing, but it's another one that doesn't cost what it should. If anything, this card is in a worse position, as it's being pretty much scalped from the point of origin. Great card, appalling price. D. I really wanna love Kepler. The higher end models have aged better than I think a lot of people give them credit for, but DX12 and Vulkan are their weak points. Drivers are being discontinued, and the 3GB frame buffer was always going to hold things back. The 780 kicks ass in Forza and Fortnite, but gets annihilated in Cyberpunk and Doom Eternal. C. So, VEGA 64. Amazing card, held up really well over time and looks like it's going to be competitive going forward. For £250, maybe even £300 at a push, I'd take one of these over basically anything else. But it doesn't cost that, it costs £700. F. I don't want to pretend for a second you should consider getting a GT 710, especially not the DDR3 version I was unlucky enough to review. But there's one thing keeping it out of F tier, and that's the joy of overclocking the snot out of it and making it actually perform only slightly worse than Intel HD graphics. D. This should be up there with the R9 290X. The 780 Ti didn't look particularly good in my video, as it happened to come out at that time when Warzone had a game-breaking glitch with Kepler cards. But even though that glitch has apparently been fixed, there are still a few points of contention. Doom Eternal performance is still appalling compared to the competition, used prices are far too high, and there seems to be a bunch of knockoff GTX 550s on eBay right now masquerading as 780 Ti's, making actually buying one just that little bit more dangerous. C. I have to categorise this one with the 1050 Ti. The regular 1650, in this case the version with faster memory, works fine within a particular niche of PC builds, but on the whole you'd be better off spending your money elsewhere. C. With the exception of Doom Eternal and Apex Legends, the GTX 670 holds up remarkably well compared to AMD cards of that generation, and the used price on these really isn't that bad. I can't say it's aged quite as well as, say, the R9 280, but it also costs a hell of a lot less. C. Nope. I don't want to be the guy who writes off whole slews of cards that people spent good money on, but there's no point trying to defend GPUs that are this obsolete. Unless you can get one for less than the cost of a bargain bucket and are happy playing old games, this one should be avoided. F. Another minor shocker here from Kepler, the 4GB version of the 770 performs better than I'd expected. With notable exceptions, Apex Legends and Doom Eternal among them, this card performs about as well as the 280X. The downside is that they're quite a lot harder to find. C. The R9 270 is close enough to the 270X that it's hard to really separate the two. If I had a tier between C and D, I'd put it there, but nah, I think D tier is mainly there for horrifically overpriced stuff, and the 270 isn't bad in that regard. C. I can't really speak to the RX 550 as I never see them around for prices I'd be willing to pay, so the 460 is normally my pick for a budget AMD card over the 270 and 270X these days. Performance-wise, it trades blows with the 280X, but has the benefit of better compatibility, doesn't take as much power, and prices are pretty favourable. Get the 4GB version if you can. B. I really like the R9 380. If driver support had lasted, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it over the RX 460. At the time of writing, eBay prices are about the same, and the 380 generally performs better. In fact, hesitant or not, this still gets my recommendation. A. I'm conflicted here. Part of me knows that the 4GB Polaris cards are pretty much unbeatable right now, offering probably the best 1080 performance and game compatibility, and should be good for a few more years to come, but another part of me remembers paying a quarter of the current eBay price for them. On the other hand, if we're looking at past prices instead of present, the 3060 Ti would be A tier, and we can only play the cards we're dealt. A. This is my favourite lazy gamer card right now, if only because of how unexpected it is. There's always been a mystique around workbench cards. A few years back it was a pretty common question: can you game on a QUADRO? These days you can run this generation of QUADROs on regular drivers, so the question's basically moot. The K2200 is just a single slot 750 Ti with 4 gigs of RAM and is cute as hell. Alas, unless you can get it cheap, it isn't really great value right now. C. Part of the legacy of the 3GB 1060 is that it had a lot of very bad reviews back in its day. While it was slammed as being anti-consumer and misleading, in 2021 it's about 30 to 40% cheaper than the 6GB model, making it actually a really good buy right now. It outperforms the similarly priced 780 Ti, especially in Doom Eternal, and is a lot easier to find. The only thing holding this back from A tier for me is the VRAM. B. I really wanted to put this in S tier. I just find it absolutely fascinating. The R9 Nano is such a cute card considering how much power it has, and I'm willing to forgive the small VRAM buffer and could maybe even look past the lack of driver support, but the real problem is you just can't buy them. If you could find one for sub GTX 1650 Super prices, it would be worthy of a higher spot, but as it stands, it belongs down with the hoi polloi. B. This is more like what I expected from the 280, and definitely convinced me I must have fucked up somewhere in my benchmarks back then. The 280X, or at least the HD 7970 that it's based on, was a flagship card a decade ago, and it's held up pretty damn well. I wouldn't buy one over a 380, but there isn't much else in this price range I'd recommend above it. B. Again, I really want to like this, especially as a half-height card that might have flown under the radar for a lot of people, but I think the 4GB frame buffer isn't really going to help anyone out here. Maybe you'd feel better running games at 720 with ultra textures, but I can't see it myself. D. This is just a 480, right? The numbers are basically the same. The used price is the same. Like with that card, I wish I could still get them for 50 quid, and 200 quid feels like a kick in the teeth, but in the real world, this is sadly what this kind of performance costs today. A. And that's your lot. Looking forward to see what I can get my hands on in 2022. I'm hoping to look at some of the cards I've missed out on this year, like Maxwell 2.0, but what I really hope for is a big old crypto crash that means we can all buy these cards for reasonable prices again. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.